our next session is titled Vigno 10 Years On, Learnings on the Social, Financial and Scientific Benefits of Old Vines in Maule in Chile. This is the presentation of a research project, which is funded by the IWSC, the International Wine and Spirits Competition, and undertaken by the Vigno team. So we're going to be joined shortly by Derek Mossman Knapp. Derek is a Toronto native. He came to Chile to ski, but stayed for love and wine. Together with his wife, Pilar Miranda, Derek co-founded Movi and also the Vigno Collective, which is all about reviving old vineyards with a focus on old vine Carignan and regenerative farming to produce high quality wine and support local communities. As part of this project, they've also worked with Alvaro Peña, a noted professor of enology at the University of Chile and a very influential figure in the modern Chilean wine scene. He's known for blending his scientific and agronomic and enological rigor with a commitment to social and economic improvement. And he's a specialist in actually researching the composition of wine phenolics and impact on wine quality. Thanks to the generous support of the IWSC, which under the leadership of CEO Christelle Guibert supports and funds environmental research projects, including an annual grant to our organization, Derek and the team at the University of Chile were able to undertake an analytical piece of research looking at the last 10 years of Vigno and quantifying the learnings, the challenges, and the positive impacts of the Vigno project. So I am going to hand over now to Derek. We do have the full Vigno research project, which we will have up on the website and we'll be delighted to share with you. I should say I'm handing over to Derek and Pilar. Thank you, Derek, and over to you. I think you've got everything ready to share. Let me know if you need me to do anything. Oh, the eternal refrain, you're on mute.
Now, quickly before I start sharing the presentation, I just want to say a quick, a very warm thank you to both Sarah and Belinda, and to the IWSC for helping make all of this possible happen.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Let me just share, and just if you can just give me the A-OK that we're sharing, yes?
Yes, you're good to go. Could you possibly do it on slide on presenter view so that that's it. Perfect. I will now go quiet and let you talk us through the research. Thank you, Derek.
Perfect. This is Sausal in the Maule. We've put some pictures interspersed to give you a better feel for the place.
Okay, well, the idea is to present a Vigno 10 years later. What have we learned? The first place, we had a dedication to the viñadores of the Maule, steward of the old vines for centuries, and the winemakers and viticulturists of Vigno stand upon their shoulders. Vigno, it's a group of small, medium, and large producers in the Maule Valley in southern Chile that came together in 2011 as a private DOC-like collective to promote the old vine Carignan of the Maule. How does Vigno work? Why does it work? How can others leverage what Vigno has learned for their own old vine collectives? We're gonna answer those questions and share a few ideas with you today.
The full paper is a long read. As Sarah just mentioned, it will be available. It is 70+ pages, and there is a section of surveys of the members of the collective, as well as critics and educators. There's a scientific piece that is much more elaborate than we're going to present here. and there is a financial analysis done by an MBA who did his thesis on Vigno and kind of extended it and redirected it for the purposes of the study and brought it up to date. So what we've done here is we've done a timeline interspersed with the comments and opinions of the partner members of the collective, creating a series of takeaways. There were some secondary interviews, and we've also included some opinions from the critics and educators. Then we've sussed up the reduction of the key takeaways from the scientific study, done the same from the financial piece, and we've interspersed pictures. The idea is to enthuse you all to
put it in the context of the territory
and to read the larger report. In the surveys of the partner wineries, the final question put to them was, if a group here in Chile or abroad were thinking of forming a collective to promote their old vines, what advice would you give them? I think we even asked, what's the special sauce? So some of this will read a little funny because it's the way they've answered it, most probably translated. So from the beginning here, more or less following a timeline, Vigno began as a lunch club of winemakers making old vine Carignan in 2009. That's part of why it worked. Be winemaker driven, not marketing driven. It lends authenticity, and there is a benefit from the special relationship of winemaker with ownership. Again, this is textual. This is what the people said. The lion's share of work value was done and is still done by winemakers on volunteered time. Early on, the picture on the right here, early on the group hired an agency who did workshops on working and deciding together. One member remembers, positively I might add, being blindfolded and handed 2 suitcases before being asked a series of questions. In their words, this strange role-playing experience made a world of difference in how the group came together and made decisions moving forward. Now we tackle a tough one. In Spanish, we say asociatividad, and I suppose it's like all for one and one for all, but it's a little more complex than that. We could say associativeness. It's the more selfless effort you put in. The more you put in, the more you will get out. We'll deal with elements of associatividad as we move through here. I'm going to put a little picture in the bottom, and we're just going to take 30 seconds to explain that just before Vigno came about, a group started in Chile called MOVI, and it was the Movimiento de Viñeteros Independientes. I love to say it in Spanish because it sounds more Monty Python in Spanish than it does in English. And it was a group of small sellers trying to survive in the Chilean wine industry, as they call it, built by and for the large wineries. And I think it had an impact in creating this possibility. But what we must remember is that, unlike MOVI, Vigno was not a rebellion. The challenge and the strength, ultimately, of Vigno is the coexistence of small, medium, and large wineries working together.
Okay, Vigno became an AG in 2011.
Sorry, AG is Asociación Gremial.
Like a gremial association, if you can translate. And the few ideas that we thought when Vigno was created or officially created was keep it simple. The traditional DOC from the world often do not. So the idea for us was keep some flexibility, put some rules at the same time. Focus on what is unique and niche sells and is more resilient in a downturn. Yes. In the morning, somebody was talking about the niche, if this differential point or not, and that can open a discussion later. Keep it simple, transparent governance structure, keep overhead low. Lots of volunteer time. That is very, very important that everyone wants and it's possible, put some time on free for all the group. One partner vote, that was very important. So every partner member must enter and play by the same transparent rules.
That sounds very simple, but most of the wines of the world have weight put on the larger sellers. And in the case of Vigno, when it first began, I believe it was Pablo Miranda, when he was asked, shouldn't the larger sellers have more power? He simply asked everyone how many cases of specifically Carignan they were producing. And it turned out that the smaller sellers were producing more. So he smiled and said, well, we'll give the little guys more votes then. And that was that. We became 1:1, one each. Here the press begins. Sorry, I'm going to continue with the partners' recommendations. The special sauce: be prepared for the world not to be prepared, and for the neighbors not to be prepared too. Whilst Vigno was not a rebellion, there was resistance on the road. The wines were misfits that came from where the bulk business boomed. And many at the time felt it was not good for Chile to put this particular foot forward. Before we heard of workhorse grapes, I think there's similar situations in different places. On critics, the partners have suggested that some critics, tasters, and educators naturally gravitate toward the opportunity to taste an outlier ensemble of wines from a specific origin versus tasting wine brand portfolios, but some don't. And some will, but only once. Wine educators wanted to fit the wines into their traditional map where New World old vines did not exist. Learn to work with them, help them to discover. Vigno made a strategic decision to stake out old vine territory, despite these traditional boundaries imposed upon it. By doing this, they enabled the Academy to see wine through an approach that centers on discovery, rather than the historical hierarchy or status quo. I think one of the more interesting ones here was Flowers in the Pavement, that was published on the Wine Advocate, that created a bit of a stir, because in the end it was, instead of the Chile report, there was a second report on these other collectives that had begun, that was not seen as such a positive thing. I think in the long run it has been a very positive thing, but at the time, we weren't exactly prepared for that. I'll keep going. First, build a category of old vine wines together. Second, everyone get busy filling that category. It turns out this is far more effective method to sell every winery's wines than to surf the wave individually. Note, everyone must be able and willing to sell everyone's wines as if they were their own. Do this and tastings will lead to more tastings and opportunities to more opportunities. When time has passed and the smoke has cleared, you will, all of you, realize more cases of wine have shipped. Part of the reason the sharing worked for Vigno was it was practiced on the farm as well as on the road with journalists. And that's the picture on the right here, that there was a sharing that I think was more and more accepted, but at the time it was odd to share, how do we say, company secrets, or but to
experience, and
it really was practiced in a way. And again, the winemakers led the way. I'll let you go.
Make clear technical rules to allow the old wines to develop in a cogent critical mass. The sub-region of Mali shown through, and probably in your areas, they're going to happen the same thing. Like their own sub-region is going to speak and talk by themselves.
I think the picture on the right is indicative that if you're used to tasting brand portfolios, when you see 16 wines in a row, all themes, how do you say sub-themes on a similar theme? It's just very appetizing to me anyway.
Attractive.
Yeah. It is very effective when the group tastes together with outsiders. In 4 short years, you see how that the press was indeed interested. The will to work together that characterizes Vigno is markedly different from the individualistic modus operandi that is all too common in the Chilean wine business and perhaps elsewhere. Remember, the words of partners speaking.
Yeah. Visiting each other's farms helped make the group cohesive. A study needed to be done openly with data shared with the partners and beyond. A complete study was done and published in 1617 with a characterization from all the areas where the Vigno were producing, with the climate, detailed soils, and others factors. So that was very in the beginning when the group was established. We thought it was very, very important, come with all this technical information.
It was a very big book, very large pages. I think I'm impressed because of its
Not
size.
traveling size.
Not sure how many took it home in a carry-on. In 2018, there was the official certification of the vineyards that was done by the University of Talca as like an independent third party. 2019, we hosted an international Carignan conference. Morgan Twain Peterson came down, Kelly White. There was some wonderful sharing of ideas in the classroom, as it were, and on the farm. The final one here, very specific. It says, every partner should rotate through the directory. Remember, we're 16, so it's more than possible. Any partner that begins to complain should be included on the next directory selection. When members participate in the volunteer directory, they respect the process because they know the process firsthand.
Yeah, focusing what is unique and niche. There is no need to conform to the mainstream, not to a trend. Get your wines onto the syllabus of the course of work for WZ, MW, and Master of Songs. They are an important part of your region old wine story. Be prepared to work for what you believe in. Organize as a group to get your wines in front of the monopolies. That's very interesting, like Sweden, Norway, Ontario. They will recognize a collective of wines and work to have them make a call just for your group wines. And Vigno, it's being called a couple times for that opportunity of business. And that is very important because you are in the radar of them.
Don't forget the home front, but don't necessarily start there. I think Chile is a very specific situation. We envy tremendously the sellers in California, for example, that can sell out of the cellar door. So obviously conditions are different depending on where you are in the world. Prepare for envy from the mainstream. Be prepared for envy from the mainstream. Your local wines of insert wherever you are from will not necessarily understand your collective at first. Help them to understand it. The more selfless effort you put in, the more you will get out. And here someone says, think greater good, and you will sell a greater number of cases and eventually even make greater wine. On the left here, you have a yearly tasting that we do with various critics, Joaquin from Binnis in this case, and there's like a rolling out of the same vintage of all of the producers, I suppose somewhat like en primeur in a far off way. And yet it's a rolling out of a new vintage in front of the press each year. And on the right is a save the date for a conference that's coming up in November. And some pictures.
Yeah, the idea you have a short travel to south of Chile with the people and the land. Okay, the rules of the road of Vigno. Established in 2011, Vigno is a private DOC-like collective. So you can see in the right, the location of the area. We are like 300 kilometers south from Santiago, the capital, in a small area of Maule, in 3 specific areas. That's on the dark green on the right. Okay, so that's the territory. And the rules that we're developing with the group was 80% Carignan grapes minimum, 30 years old minimum, the age of the plants, dry farm, and the rest of the land must comply with the above rules and points. Okay, so we consider the vines grafted on all roots of País are accepted too, and consider to have the age of their roots. At least they have to be aged for 2 years before the release. Doesn't matter in which material you have the wine. There are egg cements, tinajas, barrels, depend of the winemaker style. And also, and very important, we have a certification. So we have a farm are certified by a local university, and also we have a rules for the labeling that everyone have to complain, and we are everyone under the Vigno brand or collective brand. Yeah.
So takeaways from the surveys conducted with the partner wineries. Some of the examples, some of the questions, a lot more in the study, obviously. The partners felt that there was a greater impact in the image of Maule than in the commercial part. I guess they want more commercial success in the future. And they felt that there was a greater impact in the improvement of the vineyards than there was in the improvement of the farmers helping to farm them. More work ahead again. We asked where the fruit had come from and where it was coming from today, and had that changed. And today, there's only one an annual contract. Several own their own vineyard, and most are purchasing a long-term contract and participating actively, proactively in the farming of the fruit. We asked about pricing, and pricing had gone up for everyone. For some, not so much, and for others, 75% and more than 100%. Touchy question, we asked about whether we should become a legal DOC one day, and all but one said yes, to our surprise. Takeaways, a few takeaways from the critics and educators. We asked in the beginning what their vision was of old vines 10 or 15 years ago, Carignan and non-Carignan. And there was the words that I suppose we all expected, potential and rustic. Someone remembered someone's petrol pump red. Obviously, this has changed and changed positively. When we ask about regions of the world, interestingly, Maule is obviously first on their hand. We're asking the questions, but there were many mentions of old vines in the New World, which I think is a recurring theme. Also from the critics and educator, they themselves came up with more than just Vigno. For them, it was Vigno movi and chanchos deslinguados, pigs without a tongue, are the natural wine. They're really fairs more than a group, but I suppose they have created the essence of a group over the years. Had they changed the vision of Chile? Absolutely, more vibrant. They changed the stereotype. They'd made Chilean wine more attractive. They said that Movi had a cohesive philosophy, that Vigno was an appellation, and that this model of Vigno others should follow it, and it should be applied in other regions. They said that they made Chile exciting, distinctive, sexy, and more desirable. Vigno contributes to a stronger stylistic diversity, and that these groups logically start as ideas and then materialize in associations and or events. But behind them, there's a strong idealism that borders on the positive, takes them beyond inertia. What else do we have here? This was coming out of the subsequent interviews, and there was a couple of interviews about how old is old and how frail is old. And I guess what more than one of the interview was trying to get across was that some people hold this idea that all old vines are fragile and frail. And they said that no, some Carignana, to say nothing of País, not so frail. Vines well taken care of can be far more robust than many people think. On the farms where vines are proactively being revived, regenerative agriculture, I think there's some common themes here. They mentioned specifically during the wet season when they're trying to straighten rows so that the plowing by horse can be what it once was. And they talked about how these plants in the wet ground can be twisted and turned. how dead wood is cold so that the vines grow back to be thick again. And this was, they insisted that extranjeros, that people from outside saw this as surprising and odd. They also mentioned the case of a couple of vineyards that were burned very badly in our bushfires of 2017, where the plant above the ground was burned. The vineyard was burned badly, but that the root, the how do you say, the life force of the root structure was so strong that new shoots came up and literally used the old charred trunk as support and continued to live. What one pulled upon was the life experience of 70, 80, 100 plus years, apparently serving them to confront the extreme weather of modern times. They kind of mentioned this how do you say, the sequía, the drought of the last few years is kind of nothing compared to 38 and 39. There was some interesting interviews. On the winemaking style of Vigno, no one likes to talk about the olden times, but the few who did mentioned that at the beginning of the Renaissance of Carignan and the Maule, the winemakers were still applying kind of a style of extraction in small barriques that was very popular at the time. And that once the group had formed and there was more sharing amongst the group, this style was very short-lived. And that Carignans today are crafted to showcase the fruit in the vineyard sites. No one really likes to talk about the moniker of natural commercial wines, but obviously working with Carignana with higher acidity, it's possible to make wines with less intervention. And one of the beauties someone insisted upon of the old vines was the lignified raspon or stems, and that this made for wonderful use in the fermenters. Is this still me?
Yes.
One of the changes in the history that I thought was very interesting is when we speak of Chile, normally talk about if you've done a history of Carignan when the group was formed, or even 5 or 6 years ago, you would have talked about the introduction in the early days and the proliferation, and when the French varieties come as part of the culture of the late 1800s. And then you would then have jumped to earthquake recovery after 1939, because the earthquake of 2010 resonated with that of 1939, and they became like bookends in the beginning of the presentation of Vigno. And what's come out in the work that historians have done in the meantime is that between 1900 and 1924, there's a group of Catalans, not French. So you may know of these names in the Chilean wine business, and that what they were doing is by train, they were bringing up País, Cinsault, Moscatel, Carignan from the south and bottling it in the south of Santiago, and that this was a booming business. Obviously, then these things went into decline and neglect as the modern kind of say New World Bordeaux-related varieties came out, and then 2005, 2010 is how do you say, Carignan begins its revival as a solo artist.
Yeah, like an inspiration from Vigno, there are another group that's appear like a copycat collective, and it's Al Maule that's appearing in 2021, and is part by some members of Vigno, and they're focused on all by producers of the oldest grape variety in America. In Chile, that's País. And the idea they were based in a few ideas of Moby, thinking in some regulations to work by themselves. So
Vigno,
sorry. So Vigno. So the idea is you have at least 90% or more from a País variety, working with old vines at least 3 years old, dry farming, all bushes. And the idea is incorporate not just the medium or small company, also the growers from the area in Maule. And probably you'll see also in a few minutes that is part of the financial analysis that maybe this Vigno association could be very interesting to replicate in different areas, like a model.
Someone else used the phrase piggyback I suppose we could say that instead of copycat.
Okay, focusing the science part of the study, we're gonna try to focus just in 3 drivers, that is consistency, diversity, and typicity. This part of the project was done by Álvaro Peña, that, like Sarah said, that's a professor at the University of Chile. Okay, about consistency, regardless of the zone, Chilean Carignan wines have high acidity and color intensity, and a very, very good tannin structure that ensures for good aging. For that reason, also recommended at least 2 years in the bottle before release to give it more roundness and complexity in the wines. Okay, so the idea in the graphics, you see different areas where vinos are made, so Sausal, Melosal, but in general they're around the 3.3 pH. The acidity and sulfuric acid expressed is around between 4 and 5.5, so it's quite high. And the study was analyzing wines from the 3 different vintages, so it's 12, 14, 21. The idea is keep some information for the vintage 23 in the future. About diversity, independently of the common aspect of the vinos or the wine, the magnitude, intensity of their chemical composition change in each subzone, which contribute to the sensory diversity. So there are lines through that you can identify in the Vigno wines, but also these specific areas give you some diversity. And this on the graphic, the idea is explain or show the different amount of different compounds like ester, terpenes, aldehydes. Okay, so you can identify the group of Vigno, the Carignanes made in the Maule, but also you gonna find a special or different wines from every sub area. Yeah, so consistent, more detailed diversity becomes personality, and we think that is very, very important. About typicity, the idea was a study Carignan from France, Spain, and Italy, and these wines were recommended for partners in those different 3 countries. They have a chemical composition that contribute to a sensory typicity that differentiate them from other Carignan wines in the world. So if you follow the yellow line, you can see more different the Chilean Carignans than the European Carignans. If you put attention, persistency, in typicity, and acidity, so you can see that more the European wines they have a behavior that is more similar than the Chilean Carignan.
And more pictures. Not all of the wines, but some of the wines are really up on the Cordillera de la Costa, or coastal mountains, Chile's other mountains, original mountains.
Thank you, Derek and Pilar.
Wait, we've got a few more.
Yeah,
Go for it.
Okay, the business portion, I shall be brief. His original thesis was that the Chilean wine trade did not provide enough structure. So for over 30 years, a box has cost less than $30. He was fascinated by Vigno costing 4 times the average price, having tremendous critical recognition, having consolidated a collective brand, and between the 16 vineyards, having a production of around 60,000 cases, including domestic production. Now, doesn't sound like very much, but if we were to analyze how much Chilean wine sells for $110 plus per case, suddenly that's a very interesting number. Just quickly, one of the most interesting things that this MBA financial numbers banker guy communicated to me as he was doing this was that in his original thesis, he was hell-bent that the Cabernets of the Maipo and the the Carmenere of Pelmo should be doing this. And when he realized what was going on with the Old Vine Conference, he really saw a connection between these kind of lesser known underdog old vines in regions lesser known as applying this kind of collective thinking. Here on the right, you have the pricing of wines with mention of Reserva, Gran Reserva, and wines without versus Vigno, shown two ways in the graph that you really see how Vigno kind of flies above. Another thing I thought was interesting that the financial person explained was, and one of the critics said that there's no need to limit production in old vines because there's natural lower yields. So it kind of makes for a comfortable way to make an inherent DOC. And another thing he said that I thought was most interesting was that someone insisted that just because wines are old, they could be mediocre. He didn't really understand this. He said, from a strict financial perspective, if an old vineyard is good, if someone's bothered to take care of it so long, it can't be mediocre. And in his words, he said, if the vineyard not produced great fruit and from this great wine, it would have been replaced by kiwis 30 years ago, blueberries 20 years ago, or cherries 10 years ago. I thought it was a very pragmatic thing. And to end on the business piece, he spoke of niches. And he said it's a niche can be a better investment than a less than differentiated share of mainstream. And he said in today's world of business, the 70 or 80 years it takes for a vineyard to grow is a rather high barrier to entry. I'm going to skip over and we're going to finish up here. So the overall takeaways would be, beginning with the associatividad that we spoke of, the working together to create a category.
Consistent, detailed diversity becomes personality.
And I just ended with what I just said about the barrier to entry. And with that, we'd just like to say thank you again, IWSC, Sarah and Belinda, and to all of you.
Thank you. Thank you, Derek, and to, of course, all of your compatriots in the Vigno Collective. I thought that the comment about the kind of kindred spirits coming together was really interesting. And certainly this underdog and elevating of an apparently workhorse variety is something that we saw in parallels with South Africa.
And what was most interesting is he insisted that that was, as a banker, like as a financial numbers guru,
yeah,
that's where he saw the future, which I thought was interesting. It wasn't of the heart, but the head. Yeah.
So I think that this is another way in in which we can learn from old vines in how we think about categories and value and storytelling and of truthful stories around wine quality. The full research project, again, thank you to IWSC for their support and allowing us to undertake this kind of research. I've put it into the chat. I just wanted to highlight that I know that within that project, within that piece of research, you highlight that the collective branding has led to significantly higher grape prices and improved vineyard management, particularly for small-scale farmers who struggled in this complete wild hinterland, really, of Maule. So this is really significant work. It's doing good. It's making great wine. So thank you. I do have a couple of questions, which we just need to answer quickly because we're running a little behind the time. So one of them is from Angela Lloyd. Do the children of these 16 producers equally buy into what you have achieved?
The children.
The children of the 16, the next generation. I think that Angela is getting at, do you think this collaboration will continue?
Yes, but I think that really does have to be defined because it has to, at some point, it has to be, how do we say, professionalized. That I think it will always depend on a certain amount of volunteering time, but I think it has to be professionalized. And I think there we've learned, working with the larger companies, how to make it work, how to cross that generational gap. It's very interesting, the idea of generations, because I think it more than just for us or in Vigno, the next generation is a very large challenge.
For every old vines.
Because in these communities, a lot of children would sooner go to town. They would sooner go to the city. And how do you make people want to stay on the land, come back to the land, or go to the land to do this?
Yeah. There are a couple of very more challenging questions from Alda Yarrow and Dean Lepan, challenging the assertion that just because someone has taken care of a vineyard for decades, it means that it's good or great. Plenty of old vineyards are used to make mediocre wines. Agreed. Conversely, there are some, almost neglected, forgotten vineyards that were previously planted for distillation, whose kind of benign neglect is now being restored. I think that's a big question. If you don't mind, Alda and Dean, I'm not putting you off. Happy to pick up on that, but just so that we can keep on schedule for this day of the conference, let me come back to you on that. And I think that's probably a whole session on its own. So thank you to Pilar and Derek.
I hope we get to put the wines out when we have a presential, or how do we say that?
Yes.
An in-person conference, wherever in the world that is.
Yes. Watch this space. So thank you so much. We're now moving on